Before we start, let me ask you something. Do you believe in whispers you can't explain? Whispers that don't belong to anyone. If you do, stick around because this story will make you think twice before camping near a quiet, still lake. Hit subscribe, leave a comment about where you're listening from, and hold on tight. You're going to want to keep your light on for this one. It all started when I decided to join some friends on a weekend camping trip. We'd heard of a lake hidden deep in the woods. No one really went there because it wasn't on any maps, but a guy in town swore it was the most beautiful, untouched place you could ever find. Something about the idea thrilled me, though I couldn't explain why. We reached the lake just before sunset. The water was so still it looked like glass, reflecting the fiery orange sky. It was breathtaking, but there was something else about it too. Something that made me feel watched, even though there wasn't a soul around. I brushed it off. After setting up camp, we lit a fire and sat down to roast marshmallows. That's when it happened. The first whisper. It was faint, like someone murmuring from far away. "Did you hear that?" I asked. My friend Caleb froze. "It's the wind," he said, though his voice shook. But it wasn't. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal. The whispers grew louder as the night went on. They were soft, almost pleading, and seemed to come from the water itself. At first, we laughed it off, pretending we weren't scared. But when we went to check the lake, we saw ripples moving across the surface, even though the air was perfectly still. "Hello," Caleb called out nervously. No answer, just whispers. Hours passed, and the mood grew heavier. One by one, my friends decided to go to their tents, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the whispers. They sounded so close now, as if they were calling my name, and then I heard the splash. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me sit up. I looked around. Everyone was still in their tents. No one else had heard it. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow on the lake. That's when I saw it, a figure standing ankle-deep in the water. I froze. "Caleb?" I whispered, though I already knew it wasn't him. The figure turned slowly, and for a moment, I thought it might be one of my friends playing a prank. But then I saw its face. There wasn't one. I stumbled back, and the thing tilted its head as if it were studying me. Before I could scream, it sank into the water without a sound, leaving the surface perfectly still. I ran back to the tents, shaking Caleb awake. "There's something in the lake," I hissed. He groaned and rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I dragged him to the shore, but of course, the thing was gone. The whispers had stopped too, replaced by an eerie silence. Caleb looked annoyed, but there was fear in his eyes. "Go to bed," he muttered, walking back to his tent. But I couldn't. I stayed by the fire, staring at the lake until sunrise. When morning came, one of our friends was missing. We searched everywhere, calling his name, checking the woods, even diving into the lake. But there was no sign of him. His tent was untouched, his shoes still by the fire. And that's when we noticed the whispers had started again. This time, they were louder. I could still hear the whispers growing louder, almost like they were swirling around me, rising and falling as though they were alive. The lake seemed different in the daylight, calmer, less threatening, but the sense of something being terribly wrong hadn't left. I felt like the ground beneath my feet didn't belong to me, like the lake was breathing, waiting, hungry. We called for our missing friend again, but the echoes of his name only bounced back at us from the still forest. Caleb said maybe he had wandered off and would come back soon, but deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Something had taken him. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure, like I was being crushed by the weight of the truth I didn't want to face. As the sun climbed higher, the whispers stopped entirely, leaving an emptiness that was even worse. The silence made me feel like I was standing in the middle of a terrible secret, something ancient and wrong. Caleb and the others tried to act normal. They wanted to eat breakfast, pack up, and leave, but I couldn't. I kept staring at the water, convinced it would give me some kind of answer. That's when I saw them. Shadows. They were faint at first, just dark shapes flickering beneath the surface. At first I thought it was fish, but these shapes didn't move like anything living. They twisted and swirled, stretching and curling as though they were watching us from below. "Guys," I whispered, my throat dry. "Look." But when they came over, the shadows were gone. Caleb sighed and shook his head, muttering that I was losing it. Maybe I was, but as they turned back to the tents, the shadows returned. This time, they were clearer. Shapes of people. Faces. They weren't alive. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but when I blinked, the faces melted into the rippling water. I could feel them, though, watching me waiting. The afternoon dragged on, and we decided to stay one more night, just in case our friend came back. The others stayed close to the fire as darkness fell, trying to joke and keep their spirits up. But the laughter felt forced, like it didn't belong in a place like this. I sat apart from them, staring at the black water. And then I heard it, a splash. It was soft, like a pebble being tossed into the lake, but there was no one near the shore. I stood up, my chest tightening as I scanned the darkness. That's when I saw the ripples. They weren't moving toward the edge. They were moving away, like something had just slipped under the surface. I grabbed Caleb's arm, my voice shaking. "It's happening again?" He rolled his eyes but stood to look anyway. His face changed the moment he saw the ripples, pale, tight, like he couldn't explain what he was seeing. "We're leaving in the morning," he muttered, his voice barely audible. But I knew the lake wouldn't wait. That night, the whispers came back, louder than before. They didn't sound like murmurs anymore. They sounded like screams underwater, desperate and garbled. I stayed awake, clutching my flashlight, praying for dawn. The others slept uneasily, twitching and muttering in their sleep. And then I heard it, a voice. It was soft, clear, and unmistakable. "Help me!" I turned toward the sound, my stomach sinking. It came from the direction of the lake. My legs shook as I stood, stepping toward the shoreline. The voice called again, faint but urgent. It sounded just like our missing friend. "Help me, please." My heart pounded as I reached the edge of the water. The moon reflected on the surface, making it look like glass. I leaned forward, my breath fogging the cold night air, and that's when I saw him. His face. It was just below the surface, pale and distorted, but it was him. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth opening and closing like he was screaming, but no sound came out. I screamed, stumbling back, but the water stayed calm. When I looked again, he was gone. The others woke up, alarmed by my scream. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but they didn't believe me. Caleb grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "You're seeing things? It's the stress," he shouted. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew the lake wasn't done with us. As we argued, the fire sputtered and died out, plunging us into darkness. The whispers rose again, closer now, circling us like a predator. One by one, the others fell silent, their eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. Figures stood on the shore. They were barely visible in the moonlight, but I could see their eyes glowing faintly. Their bodies were wet, dripping with water that pooled at their feet. They didn't move, just stared at us with empty expressions. And then one of them took a step forward. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure took another step, water streaming from its legs as it moved closer. My flashlight trembled in my hands as I raised it, the beam cutting through the darkness. It didn't help. The light hit the figure's face, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Its eyes were empty sockets, black holes where there should have been life. Its skin was pale and bloated, stretched tight over its skull like it had been soaking in water for far too long. The worst part was its mouth, twisted into a horrible, unnatural grin, showing rows of broken, jagged teeth. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My legs felt like they were made of stone. The others didn't move either. Caleb, usually so calm, stood frozen with his mouth half open, his eyes wide with pure terror. Another step, then another. The thing was only a few feet away now, and I could hear the squelching sound of water dripping from its clothes. And then it whispered, not like the voices from the lake. It was closer, sharper, like it was speaking directly into my mind. "Come with us," it said, its grin stretching wider. "It's better down here." I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a rock. I fell hard, the air rushing out of my lungs, but I didn't take my eyes off the thing. It stopped for a moment, tilting its head like it was studying me, and then it raised one pale, clawed hand. That's when I saw movement behind it. More figures, rising from the lake. One by one, they emerged, their heads and shoulders breaking through the surface. There were so many of them. Men, women, even children, all staring at us with the same hollow eyes and twisted smiles. Their bodies shimmered in the moonlight, soaked and dripping, their feet making no sound as they stepped onto the shore. "Run!" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. Caleb grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet, and we bolted toward the tents. The others followed, but I could hear the splashing and squelching footsteps behind us, getting closer. The whispers were back, louder now, filling the air with a strange, almost melodic hum that made my head throb. We dove into the first tent, yanking the zipper closed behind us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Caleb held a knife, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grip it. The whispers outside grew louder, circling us, coming from all sides. And then the tent began to move. At first, it was a gentle tug like someone pulling at the fabric. But then it grew stronger, more violent. The entire tent shook, the poles bending as though something was trying to crush us. I could hear the others screaming, but their voices sounded far away, drowned out by the whispers and the sound of wet hands dragging across the fabric. The zipper started to slide down. I grabbed it, pulling it back up with all my strength, but it was no use. The tent was being ripped apart from the outside, long, claw-like fingers tearing through the material. A pale, grinning face appeared through the opening, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "Come with us," it whispered again. I screamed, kicking at the figure, but my foot went straight through it. It didn't feel solid, more like cold, thick water. The thing didn't even flinch. It just kept staring, its grin stretching wider and wider until it didn't look human anymore. And then the tent collapsed. We scrambled out, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The figures were everywhere now, surrounding us, their twisted faces glowing faintly in the moonlight. I could see the lake behind them, its surface churning like it was alive. One of the figures reached out, its hand brushing against my arm. It felt like ice burning cold, and I yanked away, stumbling toward the trees. Caleb shouted my name, but I couldn't stop. The whispers were in my head now, louder than ever, repeating the same words over and over. "Come with us. Come with us. Come with us." I didn't know where I was running. The trees blurred together, the ground uneven beneath my feet. Branches scratched my arms and face, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting as far away from the lake as possible. But no matter how far I ran, the whispers followed. I could still hear them, faint and haunting, even as I reached the edge of the woods. When I turned to look back, I saw them standing in the distance, their pale faces glowing in the darkness. They didn't chase me, but I knew they were waiting for me to come back. And the worst part? I don't know if I ever really left. Even as I stood there at the edge of the woods, catching my breath and telling myself I was safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My legs trembled, and my throat felt raw from the screaming, but my ears still caught faint whispers, soft and teasing, carried on the wind. They weren't coming from the lake anymore. They were closer now, around me. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam swept over the trees, illuminating shadows that danced and twisted unnaturally. The forest was alive in a way that made my skin crawl, as though the trees themselves were leaning closer, listening. "Caleb?" I called out, my voice barely more than a croak. There was no answer. The others had been right behind me when I bolted, hadn't they? I thought I'd heard their footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, their panicked breaths filling the dark air. But now I was alone. I called again, louder this time. "Caleb, where are you?" Still nothing. Just a faint rustling of leaves that didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like movement, like something watching me, waiting. I stepped backward, my feet crunching on the dead leaves and twigs below. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering weakly before it stabilized again. That was when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the circle of light. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It was tall and thin, its shape almost blending into the trees. But its face was wrong. It wasn't like the others from the lake. It had no mouth, no eyes, just a smooth, featureless surface, pale and shining faintly in the darkness. I took another step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that sent chills racing down my spine. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I already knew it wouldn't answer. And then it took a step toward me. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it didn't quite know how to use its limbs. The way its arms swung and its legs bent reminded me of a puppet on strings, being controlled by something I couldn't see. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. Behind me, I heard another sound, soft footsteps coming closer. I whipped around, the flashlight beam catching glimpses of more figures emerging from the shadows. They all had the same smooth, blank faces, their bodies unnaturally thin and elongated. They didn't speak. They didn't make a sound, but I could feel their whispers in my mind, cold and relentless. "Stay with us." I backed away, my head spinning, the air feeling heavier with each passing second. I didn't know which way to run anymore. The figures were everywhere now, closing in from all sides. I turned and bolted deeper into the woods, my legs burning as I pushed myself to keep going. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and echoing in my skull until I thought I might lose my mind. Branches clawed at my arms and face, the darkness pressing in around me like a living thing. My flashlight flickered again, and for a terrifying moment, it went out completely. I stopped, gasping for breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. When I turned the flashlight back on, it lit up a face inches from mine. I screamed, stumbling back and falling hard onto the ground. The figure loomed over me, its blank face impossibly close. Its head tilted, and for the first time, I noticed something moving beneath its skin, shadows, writhing and shifting like they were trapped inside. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. And then, slowly, it raised one long, bony finger pointing behind me. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to look, but I couldn't stop myself. When I turned, I saw the lake. It shouldn't have been there. I'd run so far, deeper into the forest, away from the water. But somehow, impossibly, it was right there in front of me, its surface as still and black as glass. The whispers were deafening now, rising into a chorus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The figures were all around me, their blank faces turned toward the lake. And then I saw them, the hands. They were rising out of the water, pale and twisted, their fingers clawing at the surface like they were trying to pull themselves free. One by one, heads followed, faces that were swollen and bloated, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, but the ground beneath my feet was soft, wet. I looked down and saw that I was standing in water. It was spreading, rippling outward from the lake, swallowing the earth. My flashlight flickered again, and this time, it didn't come back on. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the lake, and a voice, clear and cold, cutting through the whispers. "You can't run?" The voice echoed in my mind, sharp and cold, wrapping around my thoughts like icy chains. My legs refused to move, no matter how much I willed them to. It felt as though the water creeping up my ankles was alive, rooting me to the spot. The whispers had changed now, no longer soft or pleading. They were harsh, angry, and growing louder with every passing second. "Don't look down," I told myself, my voice barely audible over the noise. But I couldn't help it. My gaze dropped, and what I saw made my stomach lurch. Hands. Not just one or two. There were dozens of them beneath the water, their fingers clawing upward, twisting and writhing like snakes. The water wasn't just spreading anymore, it was pulling me down. I struggled, trying to lift my feet, but the ground had become soft and sticky, like mud. I screamed for Caleb, for anyone, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the relentless whispers that now felt like they were coming from inside me. Then, just as I thought the water would drag me under completely, everything stopped. The whispers fell silent. The hands froze. Even the air seemed to grow still, heavy with a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. My chest rose and fell rapidly as I stood there, unable to move, my heart hammering so loud it felt like the only sound left in the world. That's when I noticed the figures. They were closer now, their blank faces turned directly toward me. Their bodies were still, unnaturally rigid, like statues carved from shadow. But their eyes, or where their eyes should have been, seemed to burn with a faint light. It wasn't fire, and it wasn't human. It was cold, piercing, like the glow of something ancient and malevolent. One of them stepped forward, its feet making no sound as it moved across the waterlogged ground. The others followed, their movements perfectly synchronized like they were part of the same entity. My legs finally obeyed me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling hard onto the wet ground. The cold seeped through my clothes, chilling me to the bone, but I didn't care. I scrambled backward, my palms scraping against sharp rocks and broken twigs, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever those things were. But no matter how far I moved, they kept coming, and then the whispers started again. This time, they weren't just in my head. They were all around me, filling the air like a swarm of invisible insects, buzzing and writhing. The words were clearer now, spoken in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow still felt. "Join us," they said, over and over. I shook my head violently, my breath hitching as I tried to block them out. "No, leave me alone," I shouted, but my voice cracked, weak against the overpowering noise. The figure stopped just a few feet away. The one closest to me raised its hand, its fingers long and thin, stretching impossibly far as it reached toward my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the cold touch of its hand. But instead, I felt something else: warmth. When I opened my eyes, the forest was gone. I was back at the lake. The water was calm now, perfectly still, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. The figures were gone, and the whispers had vanished. But the silence was worse, because I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my breath hitching as I saw Caleb standing at the edge of the water. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the lake, his expression blank, almost peaceful. "Caleb," I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I ran toward him, my feet splashing through the shallow water. But the closer I got, the more I realized something was wrong. His skin was pale, too pale, and his clothes were soaked, clinging to his body as though he'd just climbed out of the water. "Caleb," I whispered, reaching out to touch his shoulder. The moment my hand made contact, he turned to face me, and I wished he hadn't. His eyes were gone. In their place were empty, black pits, darker than the night itself. Water poured from his mouth as he grinned, the same twisted, unnatural smile I'd seen on the figures. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't his own. "You should have stayed," he said, the words echoing with the voices of 100 others. "Now it's too late." The water surged around me, rising fast, pulling at my legs. I tried to run, but the current was too strong, dragging me toward the center of the lake. Caleb, or whatever he had become, stood motionless, his grin never faltering as the water swallowed me whole. I sank, the cold enveloping me, the whispers screaming in my ears. And as the darkness closed in, I saw them, the faces of those who had been taken before me. They surrounded me, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes filled with a despair I couldn't comprehend. And then everything went black. I woke up gasping, my lungs burning like I'd been holding my breath for hours. My body felt heavy, my clothes damp and clinging to me, but I wasn't underwater anymore. I was lying on the ground, surrounded by the tall, swaying trees of the forest. The air was thick with mist, the kind that made it hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I pushed myself up, every muscle in my body aching, and tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing I remembered was the lake swallowing me, dragging me down into the cold, black depths. But now I was here alive. At least I thought I was. The forest was eerily quiet. Not a single sound of birds or insects. My flashlight was gone, and the faint moonlight filtering through the mist wasn't enough to make sense of my surroundings. I turned in a slow circle, hoping to spot Caleb or anyone else from the group, but the trees all looked the same. Endless. Hello. I called out, my voice cracking. The echo that came back didn't sound right. It wasn't my voice. It was softer, quieter, like someone whispering my words back to me. I froze, my chest tightening as I strained to hear. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't repeating what I'd said. It was something else. Keep going, it said, faint and broken. My heart pounded as I took a hesitant step forward, the damp leaves squelching beneath my feet. I didn't want to move, but standing still felt worse, like I was being watched from every direction. The mist grew thicker as I walked, curling around me like ghostly fingers. The trees seemed to shift and bend, their shapes twisting into strange, unnatural forms. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or something real, but I kept moving, my footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. Then I saw it, a shape in the mist, small and hunched, barely visible through the swirling fog. My heart leapt, hope surging through me. Caleb, I called, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, unmoving. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. Caleb, is that you? The figure shifted slightly, and I stopped in my tracks. Something about the way it moved wasn't right. It was too fast, too sharp, like a glitch in a video. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. And then it turned. It wasn't Caleb. The thing's face was twisted, its features stretched and distorted like melted wax. Its eyes were wide and unblinking, staring straight at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Its mouth hung open, too wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. It started toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, its body lurching forward like it was being yanked by invisible strings. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in my head. Don't stop, they said, overlapping and relentless. Keep going, keep going. I turned and ran, my legs barely carrying me through the dense forest. The thing was right behind me. I could hear its uneven footsteps, the snapping of branches as it closed the distance. The trees blurred past me, the mist thickening until I could barely see. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I scrambled to my feet, but before I could run, I felt it, cold, bony fingers wrapping around my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip was like iron. I twisted around, expecting to see the creature, but there was nothing there. Just the mist and the faint outline of the trees. The fingers tightened, dragging me backward. I clawed at the ground, my nails scraping against the dirt as I fought to free myself. My screams echoed uselessly through the empty forest. And then I was falling. The ground gave way beneath me, and I tumbled into darkness. The air rushed past me, cold and biting, as I plummeted into what felt like an endless void. My stomach twisted, the sensation of falling never stopping, no matter how long I dropped. When I hit the ground, it wasn't hard. It was soft and wet, like sinking into mud. I tried to push myself up, but my hands sank deeper, the earth sucking at me like quicksand. The whispers were deafening now, surrounding me, filling my head until I couldn't think. You can't leave, they said, their voices overlapping in a horrible, melodic chant. You belong to us now. I looked up and there they were, the figures from the lake standing in a perfect circle around me. Their faces were blank, but their eyes burned with that cold, unnatural light. The mud rose higher, pulling me down. I thrashed, screaming for help, but it was no use. The more I struggled, the faster it pulled me under. As the darkness closed over my head, I saw one last thing, a face in the crowd. Caleb. His eyes were hollow, his grin twisted, and he was whispering the same words as the others. You belong to us now. I don't remember when I stopped struggling. The mud had swallowed me. The air squeezed from my lungs as the darkness wrapped itself around me. There was no sound anymore, just silence, so thick it pressed into my ears like a weight. I didn't feel my body, only the suffocating cold and the distant sensation of sinking. For a moment, I thought it was over, that whatever this was had finally won. But then I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the forest, no longer anywhere I could recognize. The ground beneath me was damp and cold, a flat expanse of gray, featureless stones stretching out endlessly. Above, the sky was black, not the kind of darkness that comes with night, but something deeper, heavier. It seemed alive, swirling slowly, as if it were watching me. My heart pounded as I pushed myself to my feet. The stone beneath my hands felt wrong, slick and warm, like it was breathing. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, the sound carrying on for far longer than it should have. Where am I? I whispered, my voice shaking. The answer came immediately. You are here. The voice was everywhere at once, soft and melodic, yet filled with malice. It wasn't a person, but it spoke directly to me, curling around my thoughts like a cold hand. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one. Who's there? I shouted, the sound of my voice swallowed almost instantly by the void. The air shifted, a faint breeze brushing against my skin. Slowly, I became aware of shapes in the distance, tall, spindly figures emerging from the darkness. They moved with a strange fluidity, their limbs bending at impossible angles as they came closer. I stumbled backward, the panic rising in my chest. Stay away! I yelled, but the figures didn't stop. As they approached, I could see them more clearly. Their bodies were long and thin, their faces stretched and featureless. But their eyes, if you could call them that, were glowing with a faint, sickly light. They didn't walk. They drifted, their feet never touching the ground. The whispers started again, faint at first, then growing louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of voices. I clutched my head, trying to block them out, but they only grew stronger. You shouldn't have come here, one voice said. There's no escape, another whispered. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The stone beneath me seemed to ripple, holding me in place. The figures surrounded me, their eyeless faces fixed on mine. One of them leaned closer, its head tilting unnaturally. You belong here now, it said, its voice low and guttural. I screamed, thrashing against whatever was holding me, but it was useless. The figures moved closer, their long arms reaching for me. Their touch was cold, burning into my skin like frostbite. The whispers turned into laughter, deep, echoing, and cruel. And then I was falling again. The ground disappeared beneath me, and I plunged into the black void. This time, there was no air, no light, no sound. Just endless, crushing nothingness. My thoughts felt heavy, sinking like stones, and for a moment, I thought I would lose myself. Completely. But then, faintly, I heard something. A voice. Wake up, it said, soft and distant. The darkness cracked, a faint sliver of light piercing through. The voice called again, louder this time. Wake up! My eyes snapped open, and I was back at the lake. The sky was gray with the first light of dawn, the air cold and still. I was lying on the shore, my clothes soaked and caked with mud. I gasped, sitting up and looking around. Caleb was there, standing at the edge of the water. Caleb! I shouted, scrambling to my feet. He turned slowly, his face pale and blank. His eyes met mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Why didn't you help me? He asked, his voice hollow. I tried, I stammered, taking a step toward him. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't Caleb. It looked like him, but his face was wrong. Too smooth, too perfect, like a mask. Why did you leave me? He asked again, his voice louder this time. I stopped, my chest tightening. I didn't, I whispered, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true. The thing that looked like Caleb tilted its head, its eyes darkening. "You can't leave," it said, its voice shifting into a chorus of whispers. "None of us can." And then it stepped into the water, sinking slowly until it disappeared beneath the surface. The lake rippled, then went still. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing. The whispers were gone, the figures were gone, but the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. And deep down I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. I stood there, my feet sinking into the wet, muddy ground, staring at the ripples where Caleb, or whatever that thing was, had vanished. The lake had returned to its calm, glassy surface, but I couldn't move. My mind raced, replaying his words, his face, that hollow, terrible voice. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the silence pressed into my ears like cotton. I should have run, but it was as though the weight of what had just happened pinned me in place. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get as far away as possible. But something about the stillness held me. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound, rising from the water. It wasn't a splash or a ripple. It was deeper, almost like a growl. My stomach twisted, my breath catching as I took a step back. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the air, filling the silence with something primal and wrong. Then the water began to move. It started as a small ripple in the center of the lake, but quickly spread, the surface churning violently, as though something massive was stirring beneath. The growl became a roar, deafening, shaking the ground under my feet. And then I saw it, a shape rising from the water, dark and monstrous, its form impossible to fully see in the faint light of dawn. It was massive, its body covered in what looked like slick, dripping mud, and its limbs, long, twisted and too many to count, reached out toward the shore. I stumbled back, nearly falling as one of the limbs slammed into the ground in front of me, sending up a spray of dirt and rocks. The thing let out a sound, not a roar this time, but a chorus of voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, all screaming, crying, and laughing at once. My chest tightened as the whispers returned, sharper now, stabbing into my mind like needles. "Stay with us," they said. "You belong here. You can't leave." I turned and ran, my legs trembling with every step. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, pulling at my feet, slowing me down as though the forest itself didn't want me to escape. The trees loomed taller, their branches clawing at me like hands. I tripped over a root, falling hard onto my hands and knees. Pain shot through my palms as sharp stones dug into my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The sound of the thing behind me grew louder, closer, the roar mixing with the whispers until it was all I could hear. I scrambled to my feet, running blindly through the woods, the mist thickening around me. It felt alive, curling and shifting, guiding me in circles. No matter which way I turned, I ended up back at the same place, the edge of the lake. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the damp ground, gasping for air. The whispers softened, turning into low, mocking laughter. "You can't run," they said, their tone almost amused. "You're already ours." Tears blurred my vision as I looked around, searching desperately for a way out. But there was nothing, just the endless forest and the black, churning water of the lake. I didn't realize it at first, but the laughter had stopped. The whispers were silent. And then I felt it, a hand, cold and wet, wrapping around my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip was unrelenting. Another hand grabbed my arm, then another, pulling me toward the water. I clawed at the ground, my nails breaking as I tried to hold on, but it was no use. The hands dragged me into the lake. The water was freezing, stealing the air from my lungs as I was pulled under. My eyes burned as I thrashed, the murky depths closing in around me. I could feel them, hands, arms, bodies pressing against me, pulling me deeper and deeper. And then I saw their faces. They surrounded me, pale and bloated, their eyes wide and lifeless. Mouths hung open, filled with dark water, as if they were screaming, but no sound came out. Their hands reached for me, clawing at my clothes, my skin, pulling me into their cold embrace. I fought with everything I had, kicking and struggling, but the more I moved, the tighter their grip became. Through the murky darkness, I saw a faint light, a small, flickering glow far below. It pulsed rhythmically, drawing me toward it like a magnet. The whispers returned, faint and melodic, guiding me. "Come closer," they said. "See the truth." I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. The hands carried me downward, toward the light. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a light. It was a doorway, a massive, glowing portal, its edges rippling like liquid gold. Shadows moved within it, twisting and writhing, their forms impossible to understand. The hands released me, and I floated weightlessly in front of the portal, my body paralyzed. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging me forward. "Step through," they said. "This is where you belong." I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body wasn't my own anymore. I was drifting closer, the light swallowing me, the shadows reaching out to pull me in. Just as I was about to cross the threshold, I heard a voice, different from the whispers. It was faint, barely audible, but it cut through the chaos like a lifeline. "Wake up," it said, soft and desperate. The portal flickered, the shadows recoiling. "Wake up," the voice shouted louder this time. The light shattered, and the darkness rushed in, consuming everything. I opened my eyes, choking on a gasp that burned in my throat. I wasn't sure where I was, but the first thing I noticed was the stillness, an unnatural quiet that pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. I was lying on something cold and rough, and when I looked around, I realized I was on the shore of the lake again. The sky was darker than it should have been, like night had fallen, but the moon was nowhere to be seen. The trees stood motionless in the distance, their shadows stretching unnaturally long across the ground. Everything felt wrong, like the world itself was holding its breath. I tried to move, but my body ached with a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep from inside me. My clothes were damp and heavy, sticking to my skin. I sat up slowly, every movement sending sharp pain through my limbs. That's when I saw the footprints. They were all around me, pressed into the muddy ground, but they weren't mine. Some were large, others small, and a few were so misshapen that they couldn't belong to anything human. They circled me in strange patterns, crisscrossing and spiraling, as though something, or many things, had been pacing around me while I lay unconscious. My breath hitched as I noticed something else. The prints didn't just stop at the shore, they led into the water. I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning. The lake was impossibly still, its surface like black glass reflecting the twisted shapes of the trees. I didn't want to look, but something compelled me, pulling my gaze toward the water. That's when I saw the ripples. They started small, faint circles spreading out from the center of the lake. But they grew rapidly, breaking the surface with violent splashes as though something massive was thrashing just beneath. My heart raced as I stepped back, my legs unsteady. The whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding me on all sides. "Why did you leave?" they asked, their voices sharp and accusing. "You were supposed to stay?" I shook my head, my hands covering my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just outside. They were inside me, crawling through my thoughts like spiders. "You can't leave," they said again, harsher this time. "You belong to us." The ripples stopped suddenly, and the lake became unnervingly calm. For a moment, I thought it was over, that whatever had been pulling me into this nightmare was finally gone. But then I saw them. Faces. They were just beneath the surface, pale and lifeless, staring up at me with hollow eyes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root, and fell hard onto the ground. Pain shot through my back, but I barely felt it. All I could do was stare as the faces rose higher, their features becoming clearer with every passing second. They weren't just strangers. I saw Caleb. I saw the others who had come with me to the lake. I even saw my own face staring back at me, twisted and lifeless. A scream ripped from my throat, raw and desperate, but the sound was swallowed by the rising whispers. The faces began to move, their mouths twisting into unnatural smiles as they watched me. "Come back," they said, their voices merging into one. "Come back to us." I turned and ran, my legs burning as I pushed through the trees. The ground felt soft beneath my feet, almost as if it were pulling me down, but I didn't stop. The forest seemed endless, the trees shifting and closing in around me. No matter which direction I ran, the whispers followed, growing louder and more frantic. "You can't escape," they screamed. "You're already ours." I tripped again, landing face first in the dirt. The air felt heavier now, colder, and I struggled to breathe. When I looked up, I realized I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was back at the edge of the lake. The water was closer now, lapping at my feet even though I hadn't moved toward it. My reflection stared up at me from the surface, but it wasn't my face. It was smiling. The reflection grinned wider, its teeth too sharp and too many to belong to anything human. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, but my feet refused to move far enough. The edge of the water seemed to stretch forward, following me like it was alive, and the reflection tilted its head, watching my every move. My own face wasn't my own anymore. The eyes in the reflection were black pits, endless and empty, and they locked onto mine as if they could see right through me. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, filling the air with a droning hum that made my skin crawl. "Come closer," the reflection said. Its voice was wet and guttural, a sound like something struggling to speak underwater. "You can't run." I shook my head violently, my hands trembling as I tried to look away. But I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to it, trapped by that horrific, twisted face that shouldn't have been mine. The ground beneath me shifted, soft and slick, pulling at my shoes. I glanced down and realized the mud was rising, curling around my ankles like grasping fingers. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking. "No, no, no, this isn't real." But the mud climbed higher, tightening, pulling. The whispers turned to laughter, low and cruel, echoing through the trees. I tried to fight it, yanking my legs free, but the harder I struggled, the deeper I sank. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my skin, and I could feel it in my bones like tiny, icy needles. The reflection moved suddenly, its body rippling like water. It wasn't just watching me anymore, it was climbing out of the lake. Its head emerged first, followed by its shoulders, its body dripping with dark, slimy water. It moved like a shadow, its limbs bending and twisting unnaturally as it crawled toward me. The grin never left its face, its black eyes fixed on mine. I screamed, my voice raw and desperate, but no one was there to hear me. "Why do you fight?" it asked, its voice overlapping with the whispers. "You're already part of us?" I thrashed harder, my hands clawing at the mud as it pulled me closer to the lake. The water lapped at the edges, growing louder, as if it were alive and hungry. The creature's fingers, long, thin, and clawed, reached for me, brushing against my arm. The touch was freezing, and my skin burned where it made contact. I pulled away, but the mud held me in place, dragging me inch by inch toward the water's edge. The laughter grew louder, deafening now, drowning out my thoughts. "You'll never leave," the creature whispered, its grin widening impossibly. "You were chosen." My vision blurred as panic gripped me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something. Figures in the trees, standing just beyond the mist. They were motionless, their outlines faint, but their eyes glowed softly, watching me. I blinked, and they were gone. The reflection, no, the thing that looked like me, was closer now, its hand reaching for my face. The mud pulled me tighter, the water licking at my legs. This was it. I couldn't escape. And then suddenly, everything stopped. The whispers cut off, the laughter silenced, and the creature froze, its head snapping to the side as though it had heard something I couldn't. The air grew colder, the stillness even heavier than before. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, rumbling through the ground, vibrating in my chest. It wasn't coming from the lake, it was coming from the forest. The creature hissed, its black eyes narrowing, and for the first time, I saw fear on its face. It turned back to me, its grin fading, and then it sank into the mud, disappearing as if it had never been there. I lay there, panting, the mud loosening its grip on my legs. But I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the trees, where the growl had come from. A shape emerged from the shadows, massive and hulking, its outline too large and too distorted to be anything natural. Its eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the mist, and as it stepped closer, I realized it wasn't walking. It was gliding. The ground beneath it didn't move, didn't bend. It was like the thing existed separately from the world around it. My heart raced as I tried to crawl away, but my limbs felt heavy, like they were weighed down by invisible chains. The creature stopped just at the edge of the water, its eyes locking onto mine. It didn't speak, but I could feel its presence, pressing into me like a physical weight. The whispers returned softer this time, but different. They weren't coming from the lake anymore. They were coming from the forest. "Leave," they said. "Run." My body finally obeyed, and I scrambled to my feet, stumbling toward the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The whispers grew louder as I ran, their tone frantic, almost pleading. The ground beneath me shifted and twisted, but I didn't stop. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The growl echoed behind me again, closer this time, and I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature was following me. Its massive, distorted form glided effortlessly, the glowing eyes locked onto me. And then the ground opened beneath my feet. I fell, tumbling into darkness as the earth gave way. My scream echoed around me, swallowed by the void. I braced for impact, but instead of hitting solid ground, I landed on something soft like a thick blanket of leaves. I pushed myself up, gasping for breath, the shock of the fall still rattling my bones. The air was thick and humid, a stark contrast to the chill of the surface. I pulled myself onto my knees and took in my surroundings. I was in a cavern, the walls glistening with moisture, the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi illuminating the space with an eerie green light. It felt alive, pulsating with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, swirling around me like a wind that carried secrets. "You are safe for now." I shivered, instinctively pulling my arms around myself. "Safe?" I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my lips. There was no safety here, not from the creature that had almost claimed me, nor from whatever else lurked in the shadows. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound, and my heart raced. I turned, ready to run again, but the whispers became more insistent, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "Stay," they said. "Listen." I hesitated, my breath hitching in my throat. Just moments ago, I had been pursued by a monster, and now I was being beckoned to stay in a place that felt equally treacherous. But something in the timbre of the voices made me pause. There was a desperation to them, a need that tugged at me. I took a tentative step forward, my feet sinking slightly into the soft earth, and then another. The whispers quieted, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for me to take the next step. "Help us," a voice whispered, clearer than the others. It sounded almost human, laced with sorrow. "We are trapped." "Trapped?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. "By what?" "By the darkness," it replied, a wave of sadness washing over me. "It consumes us, just as it tries to consume you. But you can help us break free." The ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. The bioluminescent fungi pulsed brighter, illuminating a path deeper into the cavern. I could either follow it or turn back to face the creature that had been after me. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice shaking as I felt the weight of their gaze upon me. "Find the heart of the cavern," the voice urged. "It is where the darkness is strongest. You must confront it and reclaim the light." A surge of resolve coursed through me. Confronting the darkness? I might be terrified, but I was still here, still breathing, and I would not let fear dictate my next move. Okay, I said more to myself than anyone else. I'll do it. As I moved deeper into the cavern, the whispers guided me, weaving in and out of the darkness. They spoke of a time before the shadows had consumed the space, of a vibrant world filled with life and laughter. I could almost picture it, a place where the sun shone and laughter echoed freely. But then the voices turned darker, warning of the creature that roamed the depths. It guards the heart, they warned, and it will not let you pass without a fight. The path twisted and turned, leading me to a massive chamber. The sight took my breath away. In the center stood a large crystalline structure, pulsing with a brilliant light that flickered like a heartbeat. It was beautiful, but the shadows that surrounded it writhed and twisted, coiling around the crystal like snakes. I stepped forward, my heart racing, as I felt the presence of the creature looming nearby. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far. Are you ready? The whispers asked, their voices intertwining in a symphony of encouragement. I nodded, steeling myself for what lay ahead. I am. With a deep breath, I approached the heart of the cavern. The shadows hissed, rising up like a tide, and from their depths, the creature emerged, bigger and more terrifying than before. Its glowing eyes bore into mine, and I felt the weight of its anger and hunger pressing down on me. Foolish child, it snarled, its voice echoing off the cavern walls. You think you can take my light? In that moment, I realized that I was not just fighting for myself, but for the spirits trapped in this cavern, for the light that flickered like hope against the encroaching darkness. I wouldn't back down. I raised my hands, feeling the warmth of the crystal's light wash over me. I will reclaim what is ours, I shouted, my voice steady despite the fear that coursed through me. The creature lunged, but I stood my ground, channeling every ounce of strength and courage I had left. The light from the crystal flared brighter, pushing back the shadows, and I felt the energy surge within me. Leave this place, I commanded, and the air vibrated with power. The creature recoiled, its form flickering as the shadows around it writhed in protest. The whispers grew louder, lifting me up, filling me with a strength I didn't know I possessed. With a surge of determination, I thrust my hands forward, unleashing a wave of light that burst from the crystal, enveloping the creature in a brilliant glow. It howled, a sound of pure rage and desperation, before being consumed by the radiance. As the shadows dissipated, the cavern filled with warmth and light, and the whispers transformed into a chorus of cheers. The spirits that had been trapped began to manifest, their forms glowing with gratitude. You have freed us, the voice said, softer now, filled with relief. You are the light we needed. I sank to my knees, exhausted but exhilarated, as the last remnants of the darkness faded away. The cavern was alive again, filled with the vibrant pulse of life. And as I looked at the crystal, I knew my journey wasn't over. There were still shadows to confront, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. I would become the light. As I knelt there, the warmth of the light began to fade, and I felt a chill creeping back into the cavern. The whispers had turned to soft giggles, but the laughter was wrong, sharp and jagged, like glass against skin. I looked around, trying to catch a glimpse of the spirits I had freed, but they were fading into the shadows, their forms flickering like dying fireflies. The crystal pulsed one last time, and then the light diminished, leaving me surrounded by encroaching darkness once more. Panic surged through me as I stood, my heart racing. The air was thick with something heavy, a presence that pressed against my mind and made it hard to think. I turned, searching for a way out, but the paths I had taken were no longer visible. The chamber had shifted, twisting into a maze of stone and shadow, each turn looking more sinister than the last. I stumbled forward, my breath quickening. The walls seemed to close in, slick with moisture that felt like fingers brushing against my skin. I could hear the whispers again, but they were now laced with malice, a cacophony of voices that echoed my fears. You're alone, they taunted. You'll never find your way out. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to shut them out, but the sound slipped through like a knife. As I navigated the labyrinthine passageways, I started to see shapes in the corners of my vision, dark silhouettes that darted just beyond the reach of the dim light. I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows, 1,000 unseen faces lurking just out of sight. Each time I turned to confront them, they vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. It was like the darkness itself was laughing at me, a cruel game of hide and seek I couldn't win. Then I caught a glimpse of something ahead, a flicker of movement. My heart raced as I approached, hoping it was a way out, but as I rounded the corner, I found myself staring into a mirror, an old, tarnished thing that reflected my terrified face back at me. But behind me, in the reflection, something else lingered. The creature, the one that had crawled from the lake, stood just out of view. I could see its glowing eyes fixed on me, its mouth twisted into that sharp-toothed grin, and chills shot down my spine. "No!" I gasped, stumbling back, but the mirror shimmered, distorting my image. I turned to run, but the passageway twisted again, and I was thrown into another chamber, this one filled with water that glowed a sickly green. It rippled, reflecting the shadows that danced on the walls, and in the depths, I saw faces, twisted, anguished faces that reached for me, mouths opening in silent screams. They were the souls I had tried to save, trapped once more by the darkness. I felt the ground shift again, the water rising around my ankles, cold and clammy. The laughter returned, echoing through the chamber, mocking my desperation. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the sound seeped into my mind, clawing at my sanity. "You can't escape," it taunted. "You belong to us now. You're just another lost soul." With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought against the current, dragging myself toward the far wall where the shadows seemed thinner. I could feel the presence of the creature looming behind me, its breath cold against my neck. "You think you're brave, don't you?" it hissed, the voice dripping with malice. "But you're just a candle, flickering in the dark." The water surged, pulling me down, and I gasped, fighting against it. I couldn't let it take me. I remembered the light of the crystal, the warmth that had surrounded me, and I focused on that feeling, willing it to return. I reached out, searching for the remnants of hope that still lingered in this place. And as I did, the shadows recoiled slightly, as if repelled by the thought of light. I pushed through the water, crawling toward the wall, and then I saw it, a glimmer in the darkness, a faint glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. With renewed determination, I surged toward it, but the creature was there, blocking my path. Its eyes burned with rage as it lunged for me, claws outstretched, but I wouldn't let it win. I screamed, a primal sound that echoed through the chamber, and in that moment, the glow intensified. The light erupted from within me, bright and fierce, filling the cavern with a blinding radiance. The shadows shrieked, shriveling away from the light, and the creature howled in agony as it was consumed. I could feel the weight of the darkness lifting, the oppressive presence dissipating as the spirits I had freed surged forward, their forms shimmering with gratitude and relief. As the light enveloped me, I felt the warmth of their presence, a comforting embrace that pushed back the night. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers of thanks and promises of freedom. I could see the exit now, a bright opening that beckoned me forward. I stumbled toward it, the light guiding my way, and as I stepped through, I felt the cool night air rush over me. I emerged on the other side, gasping, the moonlight bathing the ground in silver. I was free, but the echoes of the cavern still lingered in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that could return if I ever let fear take hold again. I looked back, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the creature in the shadows, its glowing eyes watching, waiting. But this time, I felt no fear. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, knowing that the light within me would always fight back against the shadows. I turned away, the whispers fading into the night, and took my first steps toward home, ready to reclaim my place in the world above. The darkness would never claim me again. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs, but the relief was short-lived. The shadows that had haunted me in the cavern clung to the edges of my vision, refusing to let go. The forest around me felt alive, each rustle of leaves seeming to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I walked cautiously, my heart pounding, the blood thrumming in my ears. As I moved deeper into the trees, the moonlight flickered, casting long, twisted shadows that danced on the ground. I could almost swear I saw shapes shifting in the darkness, twisting and turning just out of reach. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run from whatever lurked in the night, but I pressed on, determined to escape the terror of the cavern behind me. Suddenly, I heard it, a low, guttural growl echoing through the trees. It sent shivers racing down my spine. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The growl was close, closer than I wanted to believe, and I could feel the weight of something watching me from the shadows. I turned slowly, scanning the underbrush, my heart racing as I searched for any sign of movement. The forest was pitch black, the moonlight failing to penetrate the thick canopy above. A branch snapped, and I whipped around, adrenaline surging through me. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes peering at me from the darkness, reflecting the faint light like a predator sizing up its prey. Panic surged through me, and I took a step back, my foot crunching on a twig. The creature moved, stepping into the moonlight, and I gasped. It was a grotesque figure, a twisted mockery of the human form. Its skin was mottled in gray, stretched too tight over its bones. The grin on its face was wide and unnatural, revealing rows of jagged teeth that looked like they could tear flesh from bone. "You thought you could escape?" It rasped, the voice like nails on a chalkboard. It took a step closer, and the stench of decay hit me like a fist, forcing me to gag. "You belong to the darkness now." I stumbled back, desperately searching for a way out. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the forest floor as I raced toward the last sliver of moonlight ahead. But the creature was fast, gliding over the ground with an otherworldly grace. I could hear its breath behind me, hot and labored, like a predator closing in on its prey. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I had to escape. I burst through the underbrush and into a small clearing, the moonlight pouring down like a beacon. But I didn't feel safe. The air was thick with menace, and the growl had become a low rumble that echoed all around me. I could feel the eyes watching from the tree lean, the shadows flitting in and out, as if they were waiting for the right moment to strike. "You can't hide from what you are," the creature called out, its voice echoing in the stillness. "You invited the darkness. It's part of you now." I took a shaky breath, glancing around for anything I could use as a weapon. There was nothing but fallen branches and damp leaves. I felt utterly helpless, the weight of despair pressing down on me. Just as I was about to give in to the fear, I remembered the light from the crystal. The warmth and strength I had felt surged back into my mind, igniting a spark of defiance against the creature that wanted to claim me. I held my hands out, focusing on that flickering light buried deep within. "I won't let you take me," I shouted, my voice shaking but resolute. The creature recoiled, its grin faltering for a moment, and I seized the opportunity. I began to chant the words that had echoed in the cavern, words of defiance and reclamation. The air around me crackled with energy, and I felt the light within me grow, pushing against the encroaching darkness. The shadows writhed, twisting away from the light, and I could feel the creature's anger building. "You think you can fight me?" It hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "I am the darkness that dwells within every soul. I will always return." But even as it spoke, I felt the light expanding, illuminating the clearing in a brilliant glow. The creature shrieked, a sound that pierced the night, and I pressed forward, fueled by the desperate need to be free. As I stepped closer to the creature, I realized I was not just fighting for my own freedom. Somehow, I was fighting for all of the lost souls that had been trapped in the cavern, for those who had succumbed to despair and darkness. I felt their strength mingling with my own, a tide of power that surged through me. The creature lunged again, but this time I stood my ground. I could feel the heat radiating from within me as I unleashed a wave of light, a burst of energy that illuminated the entire clearing. The creature was engulfed, its monstrous form writhing in agony as the light consumed it. But even as I felt the thrill of victory, I knew this wasn't over. The shadows flickered, and I could sense that something more sinister was brewing just beyond the edges of the light. The growls echoed again, louder this time, and the trees began to tremble. I looked around frantically, the clearing feeling smaller, more claustrophobic as the shadows crept closer. There was no way to escape the darkness. It always found a way to claw back into the light. My heart raced as I realized that this was only the beginning. I felt a chill wash over me, a creeping dread that settled in my bones. The darkness had retreated for now, but it was far from defeated. As I stood in that clearing, the realization hit me hard. I had not just faced the creature, I had awakened something deep within myself, a connection to the shadows I could not ignore. I could feel the whispers returning, urging me to embrace the darkness, to use it as a weapon. I shook my head, fighting against the allure, but the temptation was strong. What if I could harness that power, bend it to my will? But even as I considered it, the growls intensified, and I was reminded of the faces I had seen in the cavern, the souls that had been lost. I couldn't let myself fall into that abyss. I had to find a way to protect the light, to keep it shining even in the darkest moments. The shadows loomed ever closer, and I knew the battle was far from over. I had faced the creature, but there were more lurking just beyond the light, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. I steeled myself, ready to confront whatever awaited me in the depths of the forest. I wouldn't let fear take me again. I would fight, no matter the cost. The night pressed in around me, and I took a step forward, prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead. I had become something more than just a victim. I was a warrior, and the darkness would learn to fear me. And as I moved deeper into the shadows, I could almost hear their whispers, echoing my resolve, promising me power if I dared to embrace it. But power comes at a price. I took a shaky breath and pressed forward, the shadows closing in around me like a thick fog. With each step, the atmosphere shifted, the air growing heavier, thick with an unnatural chill that seeped into my bones. The trees twisted overhead, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, creating a canopy that swallowed the moonlight whole. I could feel their eyes on me again, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The path ahead was obscured, the ground uneven and littered with dead leaves that crunched beneath my feet, a sound that felt deafening in the stillness. With every crackle, I imagined the shadows stirring, whispering amongst themselves, plotting my demise. I pressed on, each heartbeat echoing in my ears, drowning out the soft murmurs that seemed to seep from the very earth. Suddenly, I stumbled into a clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. The ground was stained with dark, viscous liquid, glistening under the faint light. It looked like blood, pooling in the shapes of twisted figures, their faces contorted in agony, forever frozen in a silent scream. I recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. The sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying, drawing me in while simultaneously repelling me. I turned to leave, but a low, raspy voice echoed from behind me. "You can't run from what you've awakened." I spun around, my heart racing. The shadows shifted, forming a figure that loomed in the darkness, its features indistinguishable. "You called us here," it hissed, the voice slithering through the air like smoke, wrapping around me. "You invited the darkness to dance." "No, I didn't," I stammered, stepping back, but the ground felt unsteady beneath me. I fought against it. The figure stepped closer, and the shadows parted just enough for me to see its eyes, empty voids that seemed to consume the light around them. Fighting only feeds it. You can't understand the power you possess. You're one of us now. A chill gripped my heart, and I felt the weight of despair settling in. Was this true? Had I really become one with the darkness? I thought of the light I had felt in the cavern, the warmth that had pushed back against the shadows. But now, standing here, faced with the embodiment of my fears, it felt like a distant memory, fading with each heartbeat. The voices of the forest grew louder, a cacophony of whispers urging me to surrender. "Join us," they begged, their tones sweet yet sinister. "Embrace the darkness. We can offer you strength beyond your wildest dreams." I shook my head violently, trying to dispel the seductive pull of their words. "I won't," I shouted, my voice echoing in the clearing. "I will not give in." But the shadows surged forward, swirling around me like a tempest. I could feel their cold embrace, seeping into my skin, trying to worm their way into my thoughts. All at once, I was flooded with images, visions of power, of a world where I ruled over the darkness instead of being a mere pawn. It was intoxicating. I stumbled, caught between two worlds, the light that felt so far away and the shadows that promised everything I'd ever wanted. My head spun, and I felt myself teetering on the edge, a single step away from losing it all. Then, from the depths of the swirling darkness, I heard a familiar voice, my own. "You're stronger than this," it urged, rising from the depths of my memory, fighting against the seductive whispers. "Remember who you are. Remember the light." With renewed determination, I focused on that voice, pushing back against the shadows that threatened to engulf me. "I am not afraid," I screamed, and the darkness recoiled. But it wasn't done yet. The figure in the shadows lunged, and I felt its icy fingers brush against my skin. It was like being touched by death itself, and I gasped, pulling away. The pain was sharp, a reminder of what was at stake. I had to fight. I had to resist. I turned and ran, the shadows clawing at my heels, their whispers turning to shrieks of rage. I plunged into the thicket, branches scratching at my skin, tearing at my clothes as I fought to break free. I could feel the darkness closing in, but the voice within me grew stronger, urging me onward. "Find the heart," it called. "Reclaim the light." I burst through the trees and into another clearing, this one eerily calm, the air still and thick. In the center stood a massive stone altar, its surface covered in runes that glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. I approached cautiously, feeling the warmth radiating from the stone, a stark contrast to the cold darkness that followed me. The altar seemed to hum with energy, and I knew instinctively that this was the heart I was meant to find. But as I reached out to touch it, the shadows converged around me, a swirling mass of anger and despair. "You will not take this power," the figure roared, its voice reverberating through the clearing. "This is ours." I hesitated, doubt creeping in, but the warmth from the altar pressed against my palm, filling me with a sense of purpose. I could feel the light fighting back against the darkness, and I realized that this was my chance. I closed my eyes, summoning every ounce of strength within me. "I will reclaim the light," I shouted, and with that I pressed my hand against the altar. A surge of energy shot through me, bright and fierce, illuminating the clearing in a blinding flash. The shadows screamed, a cacophony of rage and despair, as the light pushed them back, forcing them to retreat. But I knew it wasn't enough. I had to do more. I focused on the light, calling on the spirits of the cavern, the lost souls I had encountered. "Help me," I cried, and in that moment, I felt their presence, their energy merging with mine, a tide of strength that surged through me. The altar pulsed with power, and I could feel the very ground beneath me tremble. The shadows writhed in agony, their forms distorting, and I could see the fear in their empty eyes. "No, this can't be," the figure hissed, its voice cracking with desperation. I pressed harder, channeling the light, letting it flow through me, filling me with warmth and strength. I could feel the darkness beginning to unravel, threads of shadow pulling away, retreating from the brilliance that now surrounded me. But just as I thought I was winning, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest. I glanced down to see the figure lunging at me, its claws piercing my skin, the coldness of its touch seeping into my very soul. I gasped, the light flickering, and for a moment, I felt the darkness closing in again, threatening to swallow me whole. "Fight," the voice within me urged, straining against the pain. "Don't let it take you." I gritted my teeth, summoning every ounce of willpower I had left. "You will not claim me," I roared, and with a final surge of energy, I pushed the light outward, flooding the clearing with a brilliant radiance. The shadows screamed again, and I felt the grip of the figure loosening. I could see it beginning to dissolve, the darkness unraveling like smoke in the wind, but I knew it wasn't over. The darkness was still there, lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike back. And as I stood there, surrounded by the light, I realized that the battle was just beginning. The shadows may have retreated, but they would always be there, lurking just beyond the edges of the light, whispering promises of power and despair. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and steeled myself for what lay ahead. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. The shadows would return, and when they did, I would be ready to fight. I had become a guardian of the light, and I would not let the darkness claim me again. I stood in the clearing, the light pulsing around me like a heartbeat, but the shadows were still there, lurking just beyond the edge. I could feel the remnants of their presence, a cold breeze that whispered my name, beckoning me back into the depths of despair. The altar hummed beneath my palm, its energy feeding into me, but I knew I couldn't linger here. The shadows were regrouping, their anger palpable, and I had to move before they turned their fury on me once more. I took a step back, glancing around for any sign of an exit, the trees looming like sentinels in the dark. As I turned to leave, I heard it, a soft, eerie giggle that echoed through the trees. It sent chills down my spine, a sound so unnatural that I couldn't help but freeze. The laughter danced on the wind, swirling around me, growing louder, more menacing. It felt as if the very woods were alive, mocking me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I took a deep breath and pressed forward, forcing my legs to move despite the dread clawing at my insides. The shadows seemed to close in tighter, the trees shifting, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. I could feel their hungry gaze, the weight of unseen eyes boring into my back. Suddenly, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and I stumbled. The earth split open, fissures appearing like jagged teeth, and from those cracks, thick tendrils of darkness slithered forth, reaching for me. I gasped, fear flooding my veins as I backed away, my heart racing. No, not again! The tendrils writhed and twisted, moving with a sentient purpose, and I realized they were trying to pull me down into the abyss. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but the shadows were everywhere, closing in on me like a suffocating fog. As I sprinted through the trees, the laughter returned, echoing in the night, a sinister chorus that filled the air. "You can't escape," it taunted. "You're one of us now." I felt the tendrils grasping at my ankles, dragging me down, but I fought against them, summoning the light that still flickered within me. I could feel it growing, pushing back against the darkness, but it was a constant battle. It's like I was being pulled in two different directions at once, the light fighting to keep me afloat while the shadows tried to swallow me whole. I broke free of the tendrils and plunged deeper into the forest, desperation fueling my steps. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, more frantic. They were everywhere, swirling around me, their voices a distorted symphony of dread. "Join us," they pleaded, but their tone was laced with malice. "You can't fight what you've become." I stumbled into another clearing, this one filled with a thick mist that curled around my legs like a serpent. The shadows danced just beyond, their forms flickering in and out of view, taunting me with their presence. My heart raced as I searched for any sign of a way out. I had to keep moving, but then, out of the mist, I saw a figure, an apparition that seemed to shimmer in the fog. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. It was me, or at least a version of me twisted by the darkness. The doppelganger stared back, its eyes hollow and soulless, a cruel imitation of my own. "Why fight it?" it said, its voice a haunting echo of my own. "Embrace what you are. Power is waiting for you." I shook my head, the sensation of dread washing over me like a wave. "I'm not like you," I shouted, but my voice trembled. The figure simply smiled, a wicked grin that sent chills racing down my spine. "Are you sure?" it taunted, stepping closer, the mist swirling around it. "You've felt it, haven't you? The darkness can give you everything you desire. Just let go." For a moment, doubt crept in. I could feel the pull of the shadows, a seductive whisper promising strength and acceptance. My heart raced, torn between the light within me and the shadows that beckoned me closer. But as the figure reached out, its fingers brushing against my skin, I felt a surge of anger. "No!" I cried, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to envelop me. "I am more than this." The mist roared in response, swirling violently around me, and the figure shrieked, the sound echoing in the night. It dissolved into a cloud of darkness, but I knew it wasn't finished. The shadows were regrouping, and I had to act fast. I turned and ran again, my legs pumping beneath me, the cold air biting at my skin. I could feel the darkness chasing me, clawing at my heels, but I wouldn't let it catch me. The light inside me flickered, still vibrant despite the overwhelming despair surrounding me. I burst out of the mist and into a narrow path lined with twisted trees. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced along the ground. I could feel the darkness creeping back, trying to shroud me in its embrace, but I pressed on, determined to find a way to break free. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees, and I froze. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, emerging from the shadows, was a creature far more terrifying than the figure I had just faced. It was massive, its form obscured by darkness, but I could see the glint of its razor-sharp teeth and the glow of its eyes, burning with hunger. It stepped forward, and the ground trembled beneath its weight. "You think you can escape?" it snarled, its voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the air. "You belong to the shadows." Fear gripped me, but I felt the light within me surge once more, fueled by my defiance. "I won't let you take me," I shouted, raising my hands, the energy flowing through me like fire. The creature recoiled slightly, its eyes narrowing as it took in the light. "You think your feeble glow can save you?" it hissed, lunging forward with terrifying speed. I braced myself, channeling everything I had into a blinding flash of light. The energy exploded from me, illuminating the night as the creature lunged. The brilliance pushed back against the darkness, and for a moment, I felt invincible. But as the light surged, I realized it was not enough. The creature was still coming, its claws reaching for me, and I had to act fast. I needed a plan, a way to turn this tide before the darkness consumed me completely. I remembered the altar, its energy still lingering in my mind. I had to find it again, to draw on its power. The thought ignited a spark of resolve within me. I wouldn't just fight, I would reclaim the light for good. With renewed determination, I turned and sprinted towards the trees, the creature hot on my heels. The shadows clawed at me, but I pushed through, weaving between the trunks, searching for the way back to the altar. But the forest was changing, twisting around me, the paths shifting as if the shadows were trying to trap me in their web. I could feel the creature gaining on me, its growls echoing in the darkness, a chilling reminder of the danger I faced. I stumbled into a clearing, and my heart sank. The altar was gone, replaced by a swirling mass of shadows that writhed and pulsed like a living entity. I was trapped, surrounded on all sides by the darkness that sought to claim me. The creature emerged from the shadows, looming over me, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "You thought you could escape?" it snarled, the ground trembling beneath its weight. In that moment, despair threatened to overwhelm me, but I refused to give in. I couldn't let the darkness win. Summoning every ounce of strength, I focused on the light within, letting it surge through me once more. "I am not afraid," I shouted, the words echoing into the void. "I will fight." With that declaration, I unleashed a wave of energy, the light bursting forth like a supernova, illuminating the clearing in a brilliant flash. The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the brightness, but I knew it wasn't over yet. I had to find the heart of the darkness, the source of its power, and destroy it once and for all. And as I stood there, surrounded by the light, I felt the whispers returning, urging me to embrace my power. I could feel the shadows pulling at me, the creatures snarling in rage, but I was determined. This battle was far from over, and I was ready to fight. I would reclaim my light and banish the darkness once and for all. But as I prepared for the next wave of confrontation, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The shadows would always be there, waiting for a moment of weakness, and I would have to stay vigilant. The night was far from over, and the fight for my soul was just beginning.